Hello, my fellow comic book collectors. This is the comic collector geek, Alan, and today I'm going to be doing a special interview with a fellow Canadian, the comic vet, and he's actually a veteran of the Canadian Army. That's why the vet, not he's a veterinarian. So he's the comic vet, but he is actually interviewed me a couple of times on Only Slabs. He's one of the co-hosts of Only Slabs, and he does his own YouTube channel, and he, does a lot of cool stuff. So I figured, hey, why not bring him onto my show? And without further ado, let's one sec here. Hi, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. So so this is like the opposite of what we normally do. Normally it's
Yeah.
you interviewing me. So,
Yes. Yeah. And it's a welcome change. Like you've been, I guess now you're technically a veteran yourself. You've been on
yeah,
Only Slabs a pair of times now
yeah,
and
twice
brought
now.
some bangers. Let me tell you some bangers. And
Yeah,
so this is nice. This is
yeah,
nice.
yeah. So now your turn to return that. So so how did you get into collecting comics out of curiosity?
So, for those of you who may not know me, my name is Chris. My handle is the Comic Vet. Basically, like you mentioned, in my much younger days, I served in the Canadian Armed Forces, the Army branch,
Mm-hmm.
and before that, growing up, both my mother and my father introduced me to comic books at a very young age.
Okay.
I was reading a lot of the children's types of comic books.
Mm-hmm.
Archie was, like most people, a gateway into it. I was also
Mm-hmm.
reading Richie Rich and Casper the Friendly Ghost and books like that.
Mm-hmm.
And through this learning to read and understanding how comic books worked and the ads and enjoying everything that comes along with comic books, my
Mm-hmm.
father relayed to me that he actually read comic books as a young boy himself, growing up in a very small fishing village in the eastern coast province here in Canada, Newfoundland.
Okay.
And he grew his fishing village was very much isolation,
Mm-hmm.
so it would only be 4 or 5 times a year that a very large steam supply ship would port, and people would go on and purchase some new goods,
Mm-hmm.
anything from clothing to furniture to
Comic book.
um, just household stuff. And also on these ships, there was a small comic book area, along with other novels and
Mm-hmm.
maps and that kind of thing. And so the children of the fishing village would go and basically buy up all the comic books.
Wow.
Now, thankfully, they were smart. One
Mm-hmm.
kid would purchase superhero genre, another kid would
Uh,
purchase westerns, another kid would purchase history type of comic books, and
mm-hmm.
the other one would buy, the teenage type of books, whether it would be like true crime or romance and those
Mm-hmm.
kind of books that were along with the golden age going into the atomic and
Yeah.
that time frame in the late 40s, early 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And well, the kid that was buying the westerns was my dad. My dad
Okay.
really enjoyed those American Western
Western
comic
books.
books,
Okay. Interesting.
and so that really became a connection between my father and I. Not that my father was reading comic books when I was enjoying them as a child or
Mm-hmm.
even into my teen years. He wasn't.
Uh,
However, he had no issues with me enjoying the hobby and often would be the source funding of comic books for me.
cool.
And over time, yeah, as you mature, when it comes to reading, you put down your children's books and you move into something a little bit more advanced.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was Superman and Spider-Man.
Okay.
And Spider-Man was the one for me because I was watching those old reruns of the '60s comic book television show, and then the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends was going on in the early
Mm-hmm.
'80s at that time on Saturday mornings, and then Super Friends was going on. Plus, Christopher Reeve's Superman was dominating, the theaters with its
Mm-hmm.
sequels and everything. And again, my parents welcomed it all. They had no issues with it. And every so often, if I brought home or if I asked for a comic book that they thought may have been a little too mature or whatever, they
Mm-hmm.
would kind of just proofread it right there, whether
Oh wow.
on the spinner rack, and be like, yeah, okay, you can take this one. But
Mm-hmm.
9 times out of 10, I would just be going for the biggest titles anyway. With, like I
Mm-hmm.
said, The Amazing Spider-Man, Superman, sometimes Action Comics, sometimes I would delve into Batman, sometimes I would delve into the Fantastic Four. And once I started getting my own allowance and able to travel around Toronto where I grew up, I started going to different variety stores that had larger comic book displays. And then I realized that, hey, if I use public transit, the TTC, if you're familiar with Toronto,
of course.
I could go even further, and I can go to actual comic shops that are in downtown Toronto. 1 Million Comics, Silver Snail Comics.
Yeah, the Silver
some of
Snail's
these,
great. Yeah.
yeah, some of these landmark comic shops that still exist today. And I would go down there and I would start finding back issues. Like, oh my goodness, like I'm picking up Spider-Man books and Superman books that are older than what I am. What?
Yeah.
So then, of course, I talked to my dad about it, and he's like, all right, well, I know a couple comic book shops out in Scarborough, which is the east end of Toronto. I grew up in the west end of Toronto. And well, he took me out there. I can remember specifically going to a comic shop one time and there being a giant size X-Men up on the wall for $80. And thinking, oh my goodness, because at that time I'd fallen in love with Wolverine. Like most Canadian kids, they fell in love with Wolverine. Fell in love with Wolverine. So I thought, wow, $80, that's so expensive. I said to my dad, I'm like, what about that book? And he's like, $80 for comic book. But just imagine today if I picked up that GSX for $80, right? And so anyways, I can remember specifically this particular comic shop where he said, okay, you have $25. Buy what you like. So at that point, then I was picking up older Fantastic Four. I'd really fallen in love with John Byrne's run on the Fantastic Four. He was the sole creative team, both writer and penciler. The Thing had just left the Fantastic Four, and She-Hulk was introduced as the powerhouse member of the FF. So I tried to get older stuff. Unfortunately, I didn't go as far back as 55 and earlier, so I didn't get the Galactus, Silver Surfer, Black Panther, those big keys. But I did go back to 100 and started coming forward that way. It was very much again cosmic era of the Fantastic Four. And I can remember my dad actually picking up a few old westerns himself. I can remember him picking up Hopalong Cassidy. Hopalong Cassidy and also Wyatt Earp, but not the Wyatt Earp that we're familiar with. Apparently in the early 60s, there was a Wyatt Earp TV show that only lasted a season or two, but Dell put out photo covers of this particular comic, and he picked up some of those. And I can remember him picking up also Two Gun Kid and Kid Colt Outlaw. Two Gun Kid and Kid Colt Outlaw were westerns that actually lasted into the 70s before the superhero genre really just started dominating everything on the spinner rack. And that's basically my introduction. It was in that time where my dad picked up a few books just for nostalgia's sake, read them all, and I eventually found those books along with some of his original collection books. And I originally only found one book and thought, my God, after he passed away, my God, what a piece of gold I just found. And it was a Turok from the early 50s. Yeah. And I had it cleaned and pressed and graded. And then shortly after the book came back, that's when I ended up finding his westerns. And it was cool to go through them and look at these photo covers. Now, these books are not in good shape. They are holding on. They're holding on for dear life. And it's not, I actually don't even like handling that much anymore. But I can remember stories of my father's childhood where he would tell me, he always wanted to see a superhero and a cowboy's comic book. And he said that he only ever had that once. And it was a DC book. And he ended up trading it like he would with all the other children in this small, isolated fishing village.
They share the books.
And they would, as soon as they were read, my dad bragged about, he would read it cover to cover, including all the ads. So he jokingly would say, I know everything about those 3D spec vision glasses that were always on the back cover or the inside back cover of those comic books. And fast forward to today's time, where on Only Slabs, it may have been in its former incarnation, we had Paul. Paul's a collector whose YouTube handle is Sector 2815, big Green Lantern fan. And he happened to show the book that my father talked about. Only once
Mhm.
was there ever a superhero
A
and
boy
and
crossover.
Western crossover cover that he could remember happening.
Okay.
And Paul showed it, and I had to stop the show and just talk about what I just spoke about with you, and I got a little
Wow.
emotional. Sometimes when I talk about my old man, I get a little emotional.
Hmm.
And a couple months later, I received a package,
Hmm.
and inside that package was a note from Paul saying that your story really touched me, and I just wanted to let you know that this book is better off with you than it is with me,
Wow.
considering the history of what this book represents to you and your father.
Mhm.
And the book that I ended up talking about,
Yeah,
what
I'll make
Paul
you.
from 20 Sector 8, Paul from 20 Sector 2815, I don't want to get it wrong. He gifted me this World's Finest
Oh
Comics.
wow. What a
This
weird.
is, yeah, World's Finest Comics, issue number 42 from September and October 1949. And it's a 50 center, 76 pages. And on the cover, we have the Wyoming Kid, Superman, and Batman and Robin. And this book will always hold an incredible special place in my heart, just because it shows the kindness of the comic book community.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
a book that's over 70 years old. Almost, it's getting to the point where it's almost 75 years old now in a year. And Paul just gifted it to me just because I just happened for a minute talk about, this is the book that my dad talked to me about, that he always wanted to see, a
Mhm.
superhero book with a cowboy
Boy, yeah.
doing a crossover, and he did it. And this is just what represents everything that's good about this community and the
Mhm.
people that are in it. I have no idea what this book cost Paul, and I really don't want to know, because it would probably break my heart, because a book from 1949 featuring, two of the most important
Yeah, it's like Batman and
characters
Superman
to
and
yeah.
Robin too.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it was just incredibly kind. So Paul,
Wow.
if you actually watch this, again, thank you very much. I will never let this book go. I will never let it go.
Wow. That's great.
And yeah, and the cool thing is it's actually got a Schwinn ad on the back. So yeah.
That's another iconic thing from that era.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so might as well show some more books since we were sort of getting into that. So
Okay, so again, my introduction to reading comic books at a very early age, when it came to the superhero genre, is probably around 8 or 9,
mhm,
when both my mom and my dad would allow me to pick up non-children's, like non-Archie type of comic books
mhm,
that I wanted to get into, and that was The Amazing Spider-Man. And so fast forward years later, around 2005, 2006, 2007, I decided maybe it's time I make a little bit of a run. I think I might be able to work on The Amazing Spider-Man 1 through 50.
mhm.
Well, mission accomplished. It took me it took me a very long time, and it was very expensive, and I don't recommend this to any
Yeah,
Spider-Man
that's
fan.
a pretty expensive run, but
Don't do it. It's it's big, it's daunting, it's challenging, and
mhm,
it may destroy relationships, it may destroy marriages, because it's very expensive. But
mhm,
my favorite Spider-Man villain, because Spider-Man has an incredible rogues gallery.
mhm.
If you're a Marvel fan, you would say Spider-Man has the best rogues gallery of them all. If you're a DC fan, you would
It's
say
Batman. Yeah.
Batman would have the best rogues gallery of them all. It just, whatever
Mhm,
day of the week, whatever story you present, both sides are right. But
mhm.
my favorite Spider-Man rogue is Craven the Hunter.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And so this is again, if you if you decide to make a run on the Amazing Spider-Man, low grade is better than no grade. And
Exactly. Yeah.
once you get sub 20, it, generally speaking, the low grade stuff is the way you're probably going to have to go, at least for entry level, to get that
Even the
run
low
done.
grades are expensive. So
At this point now, yes, you're
yeah.
absolutely correct. Even the low grade stuff, like, it's crazy, some of the prices
Mhm,
that are out there. Even now, we're post the comic COVID bubble.
mhm,
Certain books have retained some value. But yeah, Craven the Hunter. And the reason why I say Craven the Hunter is my favorite Rogue Gallery member is
mhm,
because in the late 80s, uh, when Spider-Man had 3 titles coming out per month, Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, and The Web of Spider-Man, there
Hmm.
was a crossover called Kraven's Last Hunt, and it
Yeah,
ended up being The
that's the
Death
big
of
one.
Kraven. And it is by far my favorite Spider-Man arc above all. It was fantastic storytelling. Mike Zeck was the penciler. It was fantastic artwork inside. There was no shortcuts. It was just excellent how Craven put together this plan,
Hmm.
and that even Spider-Man's return was a part of his plan. And when you added in the background the story of Vermin, another Spider-Man Rogues Gallery member,
Hmm.
it really tied together well. And if you haven't read it, I'm not going to spoil the ending,
Hmm.
but it had such a shocking ending that it just stayed with me to the point where I am still in my life now. That
Hmm.
when I think of this particular arc, it saddens me because it is such a good story.
Yeah.
And yeah, so Kraven the Hunter, Amazing Spider-Man issue 15. It only took 15 issues for him to come out.
Yeah. Well, sub 20, it's like, basically it's villain, 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 villain being introduced.
Right,
It's
right.
and all
And
major villains at that.
yes, and the thing is, before the issue before 15 is arguably the most famous of them all.
Yeah.
And in the story behind this particular comic book, for me, was there was a small comic show in Toronto, the West End, on Weston Road. There's a small hotel called the Ramada Inn, and in the Ramada Inn, there was this particular Sunday there was a comic show with probably 25 to say 35 vendors, and I was doing laps and just looking for stuff, trying to fill out some Spider-Man stuff that I didn't have, and I actually ended up picking up a Web of Spider-Man issue number 1 with that beautiful painted cover in a 9.8 for like $80, I believe, at the time.
Oh, wow.
I've since moved on from the book, big regret.
Hmm.
And but some of these books help pay for other books.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember one of the last moments I was looking in someone's case, and they had the Amazing Spider-Man issue number 14, one of the biggest comic books in the history of comic books. And it had a detached cover, and it was rough. And I just said, "Hey man, like what's up with this book?" And he's like, "Well, it's issue 14. I want $200 for it." And
Mhm.
I thought, why would I pay $200 for a detached cover comic book? And I just said, "Hey man, like I would like this book to help work on my Amazing Spider-Man run. I'm working on
Mhm.
1 through 50.
Mhm.
But I said, all I got left is $100." And he thought about it and he said, "I can't do it." I said, "Hey,
Mhm.
that's fine. This is a
Mhm.
big book. No
Yeah, yeah.
matter the shape it's in, it's a big book."
Mhm.
So I walked away and I did one more lap, and I almost ended up picking up another Fantastic Four book that I was looking for. And that was the issue where Frankie Ray becomes Nova.
Oh, okay.
And it's a
Yeah.
very, very famous cover with Galactus's hand and Nova appearing
Mm.
in the palm of on
Yeah.
Galactus's hand. So I did one more lap after I couldn't come to a price with that Frankie Ray book. And the guy who had Amazing Spider-Man 14 said, "Hey man, I'll take that $100 if you still want to do it."
Wow.
So I did it.
Oh, wow. But actually not bad looking 1.0.
So I did have it cleaned. I did have it pressed. The best that I could, considering it's a detached cover. Now I don't recommend people with detached covers submitting them and that kind of thing, unless you're working on something special that's just for you. And this is the first appearance of the Green Goblin. And again, I'll read it up here. It says, spine of cover completely split and cover detached. However, it also says first appearance of the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, Enforcer's appearance, the first meeting of Hulk and Spider-Man. And yeah, and the thing is, if I wouldn't have pulled the trigger that day, I don't know if I would have been able to afford a copy, whether it's raw or not, afterwards, because this particular issue is so expensive now because the Green Goblin is a household name. He is, in my opinion, only second to the Joker when it comes to most famous villains in comic book history. I would say Joker's number 1, The Goblin here is number
Number
2.
two, yeah.
Yep.
It's one that even like non-comic people would know.
Right.
That's really what the standard would be, right?
And you're absolutely correct, because the Tobey Maguire films,
Mhm.
all 3 of those Spider-Mans do focus around the whole mythos of the Green Goblin. And
Mhm.
now with the most recent Spider-Man film, Far From Home, we had the reintroduction of Willem Dafoe as Spider-Man, and it turned out that everyone loved it. And and now there's rumors that he would like to do it one more time.
Yeah.
But who knows what the future holds for that. But yeah, and again, the Green Goblin's been in every iteration of cartoons that we've had on for that particular medium, and we've had multiple Green Goblins or different people be the Green Goblin throughout time. And again, the Green Goblin was there at the at the forefront of the death of Gwen Stacy, and so it just compounds how important that book is and how difficult it is to achieve, just because on value alone at this point right now.
Oh yeah, that book has gone crazy.
Right. So now I'm going to take a break from talking about the older Spider-Man books to talk about the Spider-Man that I enjoyed in the late 80s. And that basically came from once the death of Craven's storyline was over, the Amazing Spider-Man kind of shifted into talking about the black suit.
Yeah.
And from the black suit, we were introduced to legendary Canadian penciler Todd McFarlane. And Todd's a little rebellious. His history shows that he's a little rebellious, and spoke about that I've turned around the Amazing Spider-Man, helped with spaghetti webbing and all that kind of stuff. And Marvel decided, okay, we're going to give you your own book, and we'll give you full creative control. And they just simply called it Spider-Man. This ended up becoming the 4th ongoing Spider-Man title at the time. And like everyone, that overly saturated comic book, I picked up a copy, but I later on was gifted this particular one. This is a 9.8 signed, just a normal direct copy. And as you can, sorry about the glare, but you can see Todd signed it right here. You got the full Todd McFarlane. The full Todd, which is a thing now apparently.
Yeah.
And again, I really enjoyed most of this arc. Now, I believe Todd only lasted 12 issues, and then afterwards it was given over to someone else. At that time, that's when Todd left Marvel with a collection of all their creators, and they went and formed Image, as we all know. But I really enjoyed this because, again, I fell in love with how Todd was putting Peter in different poses while he was web slinging and that kind of thing, and it was all brand new. It was fresh. MJ had a new look, and I really enjoyed the large eyelids on the mask, and I still prefer it today, to be honest with you. And but the thing is, always when Spider-Man would get in fights or whatever, nothing would ever happen to the suit. And Todd took that and went almost overboard, in my opinion.
Yeah,
where basically at the end of a fight, he was almost half naked.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's again, I was just so into Spider-Man that, and thankfully, most of those arcs in those days were really good. They could, in my opinion, they were doing no wrong. Although we all know this is like the 2nd or 3rd largest comic book printed comic book in history.
Yeah, I think it's like 5 million print run or something crazy.
Right. But yeah. So yeah, it was something I really enjoyed. Now, I don't want to focus just on Marvel, because there were many books that I enjoyed from DC as well. But the one that stands out above all for me during that time, that really opened my eyes to reading that, oh my God, there can be people can get shot, people can get hurt, and it affect characters and underlying hidden storylines that only in the last 10 years I realized were actually a part of the story. And the one I'm talking about is Batman the Killing Joke by Alan Moore and Brian Bolland. This, to me, is the singular greatest story ever told in just one issue. Now, some people would argue whatever storyline, but this is just one comic book, one graphic novel, depending on which way where you are in
Yeah,
your
yeah,
life and how you want to refer to just a singular book.
mhm,
But this one features the Joker at his height. Alan Moore, I thought, just dissected the Joker and made him truly what he was, and that's just a terrorist on the eyes of Gotham City. This is
mhm,
where the Joker shoots Barbara Gordon and
yeah,
paralyzes her,
yeah,
and then basically tries to crack uh, Jim Gordon, destroy his mind, torture him,
mhm,
and Batman is just seems to be that half a step behind every step of the way till
mhm,
the end when he finally catches up with him in the amusement park. This is
mhm,
fantastic storytelling. Whether the fact that Batman is throughout the story trying to catch up with the Joker to let him know, like, we need to stop this. Something has to give because
mhm,
one of us is going to end up dead, and that he didn't want to see that. Plus,
mhm,
the story also focuses in on hands. That every
mhm.
time Batman wants to speak, his hands are somehow in the artwork, and it's, I thought, just excellent
Mhm.
storytelling by Alan Moore and brought forward by Brian Bolland. And to me, again, the singular best story ever told in just one book is The
Mhm.
Killing Joke. This is a first printing 9.8 copy that I ended up picking up recently from a former YouTuber, Slotted Up 503.
Mhm.
Jason made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and
Mhm.
ended up throwing in a bunch of Something Is Killing the Children books on top of it because he knew
Wow.
that I was a big Something Is Killing the Children fan. So yeah, again, this is now I still have my original copy from when I was a kid. It is
Mhm.
not a 9.8 because I
Yeah,
read
yeah.
that book 100 times over. And but this
Mhm.
is a corner piece of my collection, and I don't know if I'd ever move on from this just because of what it means to me, uh, for sentimental reasons, and the
Yeah.
fact that it opened my eyes to that real violence can happen in comic books like this. It's not just
Mhm.
superheroes and superpowers that people can get shot and be paralyzed,
Yeah.
and that ends up being what happens to Barbara Gordon moving forward. That she's in a
Mhm.
wheelchair for a
Yeah.
very long time, and yeah, it's just the hands of Alan Moore.
Yeah.
Speaking
That
of Alan Moore
great,
and
great
great
book.
storytelling, this is not a slab, but a book that, again, I think a lot of people need to read. So
Yeah,
Watchmen.
I was gonna say, like, I was thinking like greatest books of all time, The Killing Joke, and then The Watchmen. The Watchmen's actually considered to be one of the literary
Yes,
books, top 100 books of all books read ever created.
right.
Yeah.
So this is a collected edition. I
Hmm.
can remember picking up comic books, or I believe it was a 12 issue maxi series, and picking up issues here and there
Hmm.
at the time because they were hard to find because people were buying, like, gobbling them up. I can remember in the 80s, and just as a teenager realizing that I need to read this 3 or 4 times over and study almost each panel, because
Hmm.
each panel within it
There's
has
like
a
little
lot of
gems. Yeah.
yes, a lot of underlying additions to the
Mm.
story. And again, this is where you realize that it's not just Batman who is one of the great detectives in the DC universe.
Hmm.
There is another,
Yeah.
and
Right.
yes, and I fell in love with Rorschach, and he's still one of my favorite comic book characters today. And
Mhm.
just flipping through this again, it just takes me right back. And of course, Dr. Manhattan, whether you want to look at him as a hero or a villain or somewhere in between, this is some of the best storytelling that's ever been done.
Mhm.
Whether you want to consider it a comic book, graphic novel, or whatever, you're
Mhm.
right. Alan Moore, this is arguably his finest piece of writing that he ever did,
Mhm.
and this is, like I said, a collected edition, but this is a
Mhm.
treasure. If you haven't read Watchmen, you've
Mm.
only seen the movie, do yourself the justice. Now, the film is fantastic,
Yeah, I think so
but
too.
this is something to behold, and I can almost promise you, you won't be able to just read it once. You're going to have to go through it one more time just to appreciate Dave Gibbons' artwork and all the hidden stuff that's in there.
Mhm.
And I can remember recently seeing a copy of the script that Alan Moore gave to Dave Gibbons, and specifically telling him, I want this in the panel and this color. And it's just,
Oh wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
just the I don't want to say
detail.
that Alan Moore was totalitarian about how he wanted this book to be done, but thank
Mm.
God he was what he was when it came to this masterpiece.
Yeah.
And yeah, we had so many good storytelling, so many good stories come out of the late 80s and early 90s right there.
Hmm.
Now, I don't want to just talk about the 80s and that being a Gen Xer, like, oh, this was the best time of comic books, because it's
Hmm.
not necessarily true. We had some of the best, but there's been some excellent stuff that's come out recently. And the one that is my favorite comic book right now, above and beyond, is Something is Killing the Children.
Oh, nice.
And this is a 9.8 of the unlocked retailer edition. Basically, I refer to it just as the Frizen variant.
Yeah, I have the same copy. I mean, I love that cover. It's
Yeah,
great cover.
I've got a couple different copies of this particular cover. But yeah, Something is Killing the Children just rejuvenated my enjoyment of independent non-superhero comic books. Here
Hmm.
we have a female, no nonsense, non-sexualized
Yeah.
character just come in and be a badass. The
Yeah.
right amount of attitude, the right amount of sass, and perfectly the right amount of mystery behind her.
Hmm.
And she's just no nonsense, a killing machine when it
Hmm.
comes to protecting children and
Hmm.
doing her job.
Yeah.
And when you throw in monsters and Erica Slaughter trying to work either above or below the law,
Hmm.
and the underlying tone of politics when it comes to who she represents behind her, it
Hmm.
is just a perfect formula for what I consider a masterpiece in modern comic book storytelling.
Hmm.
Now, so, like with everything, there are some low points, there are some high
Hmm.
points, but overall, to me, this is just an extraordinary piece of writing. And the artwork and the fact that this comic book changes up how you need to read a comic book,
Hmm.
because normally we're just used to reading one page left to right, 6 panels. Generally, this comic book, if you open it up, if you don't realize what you're doing, there's certain pages where you're supposed to go left to right through both pages. And
Oh yeah,
if you
yeah.
miss
I've seen.
if
Yeah,
you
I
miss
remember
out
that.
on it,
Yeah,
yep.
yeah.
If you miss out on it, you may realize, oh, I just kind of screwed up the story for myself. But yeah, Something is Killing the Children. It it's just, to me, really good. And I had the opportunity at Fan Expo Toronto last year when Tynan showed up
Hmm.
to talk to him and just personally say thank you for flipping comic books on their head by having a non-sexualized female lead.
Hmm.
Uh, it was just very refreshing because
Hmm.
we're used to these powerhouse, six-pack,
Yeah,
gigantic bicep
yeah, yeah.
men lead the way, or the same thing in a female type of character,
Hmm.
just scantily dressed with
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
bra and
Like
underwear running
She-Hulk
around.
level. Yeah.
Right. This is not that. This is not that. This just goes to show that with good storytelling and a strong lead character, you don't need to have, the this Barbie doll type of
Hmm.
figure, or have someone look like they just came out of an adult film.
Hmm.
This is really good. Really, really good. I recommend
Yeah.
Something is Killing the Children. The trade paperbacks, if you haven't read Something is Killing the Children, give it a chance. The
Definitely.
first 12 issues, that first arc is fantastic.
Yeah. That's what I read actually.
Yep.
I stopped after that, but what I was going to say, James Tinian is kind of like the Alan Moore of today, I would say.
Yes.
He's like the kind of the writer that everyone chases after because he's kind of the best writer of the modern era, I would say.
Yeah, and obviously two distinct writing
Oh
styles.
yeah.
Alan Moore is very much in your face, and
Mhm.
whereas Tynan, to me, is a little bit. He's not afraid to do a little bit of the slow burn, that low simmer to get
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
to where he's going with his storytelling. But you're right; it's almost like everything that he's putting out right now, people are picking up for different reasons, whether it's
Yeah.
for hoping for a secondary market value, or the artwork, or fantastic storytelling. Everything he seems to be touching does well.
Yeah, and they're good stories. I mean, that's the
Yes,
thing.
and you're absolutely correct. So another story that's come out recently that I fell in love with was from the Miranda brothers. Now the Miranda brothers, Anaki and Roy, they crafted this wonderful futuristic world called We Live.
Oh yeah.
And We Live finished its first arc in 2021. And it is, to me, the top 5 stories that I've ever read. And I've read a lot of comic books in my time. This is special. It's special for so many reasons, that these two brothers are so incredibly creative, that the artwork inside is beautiful and vibrant, and they are not afraid of death when it comes to storytelling in here. The characters you fall in love with, you fall in love with right away. You're like, oh my goodness, this character is going to be so important. Not anymore.
Not anymore. They die. Yep.
Not anymore. And it just goes to show the world that they created, just how sinister the world itself can be to people and to creatures that live on it. And again, this very much this science fiction storytelling, just basically about a brother and a sister whose mom passed away recently of cancer, and that they have to travel a very large distance to basically find out if they could potentially be chosen to help save the world, and deal with all kinds of sinister aspects of the planet between here and there. It is incredibly creative. And on top of that all, there's actually small QR codes throughout the story where the brothers created their own background music that they want you to listen to as you read the next few pages. And that is incredible. It's just very original, sharp storytelling. If you have children or if you have siblings, it'll tug at your heartstrings. If you've ever lost a parent suddenly, you can appreciate the fantastic storytelling that happens here. The second volume, which came out last year, basically expands on the planet, expands in different cities and what's happening there and the threats that they're facing. And sadly, the truth of it all is that We Live was released on Aftershock Comics. And Aftershock Comics recently was in the news for bankruptcy protection, where they haven't paid any of their creators. Now, We Live was just optioned to Netflix, and I was over the moon ecstatic about it. I actually reached out to the Miranda brothers to say congratulations. Like, just that's how much We Live meant to me. And to find out now that the Miranda brothers haven't been paid, that they've gone in, that Aftershock went to bankruptcy protection, and it looks like We Live will stop because the Miranda or Aftershock owns the IP to We Live, or at least that's what I think. It's very sad to see what's happened to this wonderful story and the second volume as well. And who knows if we'll actually get to see this come to Netflix, or if there will ever be a third volume ever printed for We Live, because who knows who has the ownership, whether it's the Miranda brothers or if it's Aftershock or if it's cut down the middle. Either way, who knows what the future of the IP actually is. But again, We Live is out in trade paperback. It is incredibly beautiful to look at, and such a special story. I recommend We Live. Again, top 5 stories ever told for me.
Wow.
All right.
I'll get you to show one more book. I'm just sort of watching the time a bit.
Yep.
So, yeah.
So back to Spider-Man. If you decide that you want to work on the run from 1 to 50, you have to figure out, well, is Amazing Fantasy 15 going to be achievable? Is that going to be a part of it or not? And for me, what I realized, sadly, it's not going to be a part of my run, just because it's turning into like a price of a car. It's turning into a price of a house, depending on its grade. And the only way I figure at this point in my life is if I ever own Amazing Fantasy 15, it'll probably just be for a short amount of time to say that I've had it, maybe take a picture with it, and then move on from it, because financially, that's the kind of book that can weigh you down. And just what I mean, like if you can come up with the money, unless you're rich, if you can come up with the money to afford it, eventually you're going to need to move on from that book to put the water back into the well, say. Well, I happened in around 2015, 2016 to sell my first property that I ever owned. And there was enough money there for me to take a look on the secondary market and to see if I can afford Amazing Fantasy 15. Even then, I could not. But what I could afford was the Amazing Spider-Man issue #1 in a low entry grade. I can remember at the time. I can remember at the time picking up this Blue Label book for about $2,700 US. So it worked out to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $3,300 to $3,400 US or Canadian at the time. So that this would have been early 2016. Flash forward a season later, Fan Expo announces that Stan Lee is going to be making his final appearance in Canada, as he was in his mid to late 90s. Basically, he was doing his final tour for Comic Cons. And I asked the people that were special in my life, should I crack this book and have Stan Lee sign it? I can remember my son specifically saying, yes.
Wow.
So it being a 2.0, I decided, okay, if it was anything higher, I probably wouldn't crack it. But this also meant if I crack this slab, I have the chance to read Amazing Spider-Man issue #1, because I had not had a facsimile or a reprint. Now, I've read the story Amazing Fantasy 15, but issue #1, I wasn't sure if I'd read it or not. I didn't even know what ads were on the inside. So I decided that August to crack it. And I cracked it carefully. One of the longest ordeals. One of the longest ordeals I ever went through.
Careful doing that, yeah.
And I read it. I can honestly say that I've read my Amazing Fantasy or my Amazing Spider-Man issue #1.
Nice.
And flash forward a week later, September 3rd, which is my mother's birthday, September 3rd, 2016, being in that lineup at Fan Expo, having a few other books to get signed by Stan. This was the final one. And I put it went in front of him, and he stopped for a second and pulled back. And I just kind of leaned in and I said to him, thank you for Spider-Man. And he looked up and he said, you bet. In that perfect New York accent, that Stan Lee voice, you bet. And yeah, this is the best comic book I own. The Amazing Spider-Man issue #1. This was not the final portion of my Amazing Spider-Man 1 through 50 run. The final book that completed 1 through 50 for me was actually the first appearance of the Rhino, issue 41, which I actually thought I had already picked up until one day recently, or last year, I decided just to put them all in chronological order in one special place. Like, let's just count it all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up. And I'm like, wait a minute. Where's 41?
Yeah.
So when I went to my checklist on my phone, I'm like, oh no, I'm not done. So less than an hour later, I negotiated out on eBay issue 41. And then about a week later, issue 41 showed up and completed my Amazing Spider-Man run 1 through 50. And again, I don't recommend this. I don't recommend people like picking their favorite characters and working on a run. I know that you recently worked on Wonder Woman. And I know that you understand where I'm coming from. Like, this can be very expensive.
Yeah.
But if you decide to do it and you complete it, it is incredibly satisfying. It's incredibly satisfying. It's just I had that specter in the background, and I don't have Amazing Fantasy 15, but I do have a facsimile copy. But yeah. So that's it. That's some of my story when it comes to my comic book collecting.
That's great. So would that be the big grail that you're chasing in a weird way? The Amazing Fantasy 15?
So Amazing Fantasy 15 is if I ever hit the lottery. Yes.
That's the first book. You're gonna
Yes,
get it in that
yes, and I'm not
9.6
yeah,
or
and I'm gonna sort out a price limit that I'm gonna spend on it, and
Mhm.
probably it'll have to be in US dollars, as you know, like when it
Yeah,
comes
yeah,
to
everything's US
buy.
dollars.
Yeah, when you want to buy a big book, it'll have to be that way. But no, I've realized what it is. It's a book that's unattainable unless you somehow stumble into it. And I'm
Mhm.
not prepared to move on from 1 through 50 and try and get enough money to make that work to get Amazing Fantasy 15, just because
Yeah,
1 through 50, every single book has a story to be told on how I acquired that particular
yeah,
book.
yeah, yeah, of
And
course.
I'm still very fond of some of the stories that took place for that. But some of the grails that I would like to achieve is I'd like to have uh, Secret Wars
Mhm.
1 through 12 and a 9.8
Oh, wow.
each. I've got one or two, I think, in a 9.8.
Mhm.
I do have the Black Costume issue number 8 cover in a 9.8. So that's
That's
one of
nice.
the
That's
big
that's
boys
the
knocked off.
biggest. That's the
Yeah,
biggest in the run. So,
yeah. And I would like to own Craven's Last Hunt, all 6 issues in a
mhm.
9.8 in the direct set, because there is a UPC version as well as
Mhm.
the direct version.
Right.
And just because I was reading the direct one as a kid, I think that's what one I would like to work on
Mhm.
next at this point. But when it comes to grails like that, I'm thinking I may chase my birthday books. Now
Oh,
I
okay. I've
have
heard a lot of people doing that. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, a few years ago, I picked up the September 74 edition of The Amazing Spider-Man, and I had it signed by Jerry Conway and then Stan Lee
Nice.
in his final appearance for Toronto. And I thought I wouldn't mind working on or see if I can get because that book ended up being an 8.5, see if I can get an 8.5 of Superman for that month, and
Mhm.
then moving forward and seeing what's available for the Fantastic Four and Batman and
Mhm.
Detective Comics and action.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
right now, I think the grail that I would love to get above everything I just mentioned is the first appearance of Swamp Thing.
Oh, yeah. That's a great book. I love that cover. It's a great.
Yeah, and it's iconic for many reasons. The
Mhm.
artist, the woman that's in there, who is supposed to be Louise Simonson,
Yeah, yeah.
and just how, again, Swamp Thing stories are some of the best stories ever told, and again, from the mind of Alan Moore in the '80s, and it gave us
Mhm.
John Constantine as well. But above and beyond everything I just mentioned, it would be at this point now it's going to be have to be low grade,
Mhm.
like a 1.8 at this point,
Yeah, yeah.
because it's becoming $1,000 book in a low grade.
Yeah.
I would That's the grail that I hope to accomplish in 2023 is the
Nice.
first Swamp Thing.
Cool. So, just quickly, we got to wrap up. But
Sure.
where can people find you? And what do you? Yeah, just quickly.
Sure. So on Instagram, you can find me at the_comic_vet, the comic vet. Just click that button there to join as a friend,
Mhm.
and it'll happen. On YouTube, where I'm most active, it's the comic vet. You can just look for that the little icon. Do I have a copy of it close by? Yeah, here's a magnet copy of it. Um, if you see this, then it's my
Nice.
YouTube channel.
Yeah.
I
So,
do have channel memberships,
mhm.
and I'm all over the place across YouTube on other people's channels as well, just talking comic books,
Yeah,
like
like only
what happened
slab.
today.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yeah,
So, just quickly, yeah, all the links to his channels will be in the description. So if you want to sub him, I recommend go over and sub. Actually, this way. So go sub out his channels, and yeah, it was really great having you on the channel.
I appreciate it.
And yeah, we're actually going to have you on again with your partner in crime. So that's something to stay tuned to for. And that's going to be next week. So right now I've interviewed both the comic vet and Rob Fat Stacks.
Mhm.
And now we're going to do a joint interview, which will be really exciting because they'll be talking about Only Slabs and some of the stuff that Only Slabs does, which is pretty amazing. So thanks again, and bye for now.